everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Summer Scares Young Adult Authors Panel. I'm going to let our authors introduce themselves in a minute, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of information before we begin. Please make sure you look at the show note descriptions, the descriptions for the video, and you can see that you can get access to the Summer Scares resource page, the Summer Scares programming guide, and of course, the email, which is libraries@horror.org, where you can reach out to myself and my co-chair, Conrad Stump, to have these lovely authors come visit your library. Today, we are going to be talking about clowns and haunted houses and cults and pandemics and just lots of fun to both the library workers and teens out there who'll be reading the books. So right now, I would love each person to get a chance to introduce themselves in general, both the books you write all the time and also the specific titles we've chosen. Adam, please come first.
Adam, okay. Hi, I'm Adam Caesar. I'm the author of Clown in a Cornfield. That is the book that Summer Scares has selected. This is my first YA book. Before this, for close to 10 years, I was writing mainly adult fiction, adult horror, all horror, but they have a lot in common. Like my backlist books were all kind of written in the mind of, I love horror, I love horror literature, but I also love horror cinema, and I wanted my books to feel like, not light per se, not unliterary per se, but feel like you could sit down and read them and feel like you've just experienced a good, fun horror movie. So that's kind of my general thing, and I've done a lot of different things, different kinds of subgenres and different kinds of writing within that wheelhouse, but that's generally what I've done. I've also written a few comics. I've written tie-in comics for the Dark Crystal, and I have a creator-owned series coming out soon with a publisher, and do some screenwriting and stuff like that, but mainly I am a novelist, so that's me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Clown in a Cornfield specifically, though?
Oh, that's a It is a teen slasher. It is set in Kettle Springs, Missouri. It focuses on a young woman from Philadelphia who is moving to this kind of small, sleepy town for the first time with her dad. She's suffered a kind of tragedy. She's this support system for her dad. And there's all this kind of background drama going on and background tension going on in the town when she gets there. And she doesn't realize that she's kind of walked into a kind of whodunit slasher mystery that starts out as like kind of traditional Scream or Halloween small scale slasher and quickly blossoms into something a lot bigger. And that's without spoiling it, that's about as far as I want to go.
Thank you, Adam. Katie, what about you?
My name is Katie Allender, and I am the writer of lots of books for teens. I wrote the Bad Girls Don't Die series, and then I wrote Marie Antoinette Serial Killer, Famous Last Words, and The Dead Girls of Hysteria Hall. And then my latest book is The Companion. It's the story of an orphan, a girl who's in a car crash that kills her whole family. And she has nowhere to go, but she's taken in as a ward by a wealthy family that knew her father. And when she gets there, she realizes that they want her to be a companion to their daughter who's very ill. And just her experience living in this huge house with no real connections, and starting to realize that maybe there's something going on under the surface that is not apparent when she first arrives. So that's pretty much my wheelhouse, is normal girls put in terrible circumstances and sort of forced to fight their way out. I had a rough middle school.
I will say The Companion gives any adult Gothic novel a run for its money in terms of the fear that I was feeling when reading it. So it's great. Kelly, what about you?
Yes, I am Kelly Mcwilliams, and I'm here in Seattle. I'm the author of 2 books in the last couple years. The most recent one, I'll just work backwards, is Mirror Girls. It's the story of biracial twin sisters who are separated at birth. One's light enough to pass for white, and the other is obviously black, and they fall under the spell of a mirror curse in the Jim Crow South. But then the book that we're here to talk about is Agnes at the End of the World, which is the story of a 17-year-old girl named Agnes who escapes from an end of the world cult, a cult that talks a lot of doom and gloom and forbids a lot of things, all because they believe the end times are coming. And when she finally gets up the courage and the nerve to escape from this cult to save her baby's brother's life, her brother Ezekiel has type 1 diabetes and isn't going to survive in this place where medicine is forbidden, she discovers that the world outside actually is ending. It's come under the, the problem is that there's a big pandemic, which is nothing like our current pandemic. This book came out in June 2020, so I didn't have any kind of a crystal ball, but this is more of sort of scary zombie Lovecraftian style pandemic that she has to face.
Thank you for selling that. Yes, when we were picking the books, I should let everybody out there know how we pick the books. We try to have a range of titles. And as you can see, we have a range of different ways you're going to get scared. We've been talking about doing a pandemic book for the last few years, and we felt exactly what you say, Kelly, because your book's pandemic was not of the virus per se, kind, and a little more supernatural, that we felt it was going to be okay. But I will say these books are all extremely compelling and really fun, geared toward teens, but extremely sophisticated as well, which, as what I do in my world, is I'm a reader's advisor. I help match books with readers of all genres. I love these titles because you can hand them out to anyone from age 13 all the way up, and they're going to enjoy it. And obviously you all have written before. This is not new. So I wanted to ask you, for all those aspiring teens out there who want to be writers, I think it would be great if you talked about how you got started as a writer. What were your influences? And my favorite question for scary writers is, what was the first thing you remember writing and how was it received? Katie, what about you? How'd you get started?
Well, the first time I remember ever writing and enjoying it was in 3rd grade. And we had a 1 hour a week to write in our little notebooks. We wrote these stories and then we could read them to the class. And I wrote these long epics where I would get up, and it was I think it was the power of not only sort of creating the world. I remember the idea that I could make up street names blew my mind. I was like, oh, I have all the power, because you're 8, you have no power. So I get to create a whole city. Lots of long stories about ponies. And then I would stand up and make my whole class listen to the whole thing. And that was when I knew I wanted to bore people with my writing for the rest of my life. So that sort of put it in my head. And then I ended up going to an arts school in high school for writing. From there, I went to film school. And from film school, I moved to LA and I worked in development for a while in TV, which is actually has a lot in common with developing novels. And so as I was doing that, I was sort of practicing developing story ideas that could have been books for myself. And eventually I wrote one, and that was sort of how it came about.
Thank you for sharing that. I love hearing all the different paths people have. Kelly, what about you?
So I think that I got started writing because my mother is also a writer, and she used to, she took care of us, but then when she was writing, she put this sign up on the door that said no kids, keep out. And I was just always like, what is happening in there? That seems super exciting. And I think I was just always primed to want to try and do that. But another thing that she did for me, is she took me on her research trips, when she would go write her books, starting from when I was in elementary school. And she's a Black writer and professor of African-American literature. So the places we went to were New Orleans, or, where she wrote her first book, Voodoo Dreams. And her second book was about the Tulsa race massacres. So we went to Tulsa, and that I was maybe 12, 13. And, we went sort of up the courthouse steps, and the Klan was having a rally there. And I remember, seeing them all in white. And my mother said, she turned to me and she was like, see what happens when you take field trips with your mother. You see some things that are really scary. And I wrote about it. And I think just trying to sort of channel sort of what that felt like and how much it scared me. And I guess my general impression was that you can write about these scary things so that you can better handle them, like psychologically in your own mind, in your own world. And my mother very much was doing that, from the beginning. And I think I kind of just caught it, like it was a little contagious, that sort of trick. And that was like the first piece of writing that I really felt strongly about, like that I felt had an impact on my life. And the only person who ever read it was, my mother. But I also then in high school sought out a art school to study writing. I went to the Walnut Hill School for the Arts, and they have different programs for different types of folks, and studied writing there, and then sort of took a hiatus from it in college and wound my way back there in my 30s.
Very great. Thank you for sharing that. Adam, your turn.
So differences and similarities. The idea of I'm like changing my answer because I just remembered something that I did. I was going to start with like middle school, but I was like, hey, I remember something I did in. I remember we were in maybe like 4th or 5th grade. I remember I've always been creative. Like I was always a creative kid, and I would always but I always was a kid who was very self-critical and understood that my writing in like a steno notebook does not equate with like the Stephen King I could pull off the shelf. Like I'm like, there's a leap here. Like I was always that way. And I feel like that kind of stultified my development a little bit of like me being fully unfettered and creative. But I remember in 3rd or 4th grade, I was like, well, if we could crowdsource this, if I can get my friends who are not interested in this, my friends who do like Star Wars, I was like, we can write our own Star Wars tie-in novel. If everyone can take a chapter, if we like outline it. I remember doing this. We didn't get very far, but basically I was like primed to work at Disney in 3rd grade. So I just remember like that's almost like not that I'm like a scam artist, but that almost kind of runs through like the like general hucksterism and self-promotion of like my entire career, I'm realizing. So that's how I kind of started. But I think my more earnest answer is I think I had a lot of good teachers in middle school and high school. I had a lot of not only English teachers, but we had elective classes in high school especially. And I think if you are a teen at all interested in writing, I think you need to it could be hard sometimes, especially like it's teachers, like sometimes you like teachers, sometimes you don't, but like go to them and like ask them advice and like find a little bit of mentorship. Like, and if there are elective classes, if they say there's a creative writing class or a film and TV class or something that you're kind of interested in, make sure you take it. Like try your darndest to get into that class and do well on it, because I think that kind of set me up from those early experiences, like writing short stories for those class assignments, where I love my like English teachers very much, but I would constantly get back, especially from one teacher in particular. She'd be like, "Why are you so morbid?" Was the like the comment I would frequently get on my assignments. But I think that set me up to want to continue writing. And then like Katie, I studied film in college and realized before it was time to make that jump to move to LA. I do not want to move to LA. I would rather
smart.
Yeah, I visit, and it's still like I do not want to move to LA. So I just found other ways to tell my stories. Yeah, just stick with it in that way.
I really like that you've shared, and I find this when we do this every year, so many different paths to getting to where you are as a professional writer, but yet all of you talk about making sure you spend time on the craft, right? Writing in classes with people, with teachers. So I really like that. But I want to ask though, why horror stories? What drew you to the genre and the emotions it conveys? Kelly.
Yes, so as I might have mentioned before, my general impression about being a human being is that it's really scary. And I think that was even, more true when I was younger. And I mean, like adulthood has nothing on adolescence for scares. So I think that's why I write young adult horror in general. But I think it's just one of the ways that I see the world. It's a lens that makes sense to me. And I really enjoy character journeys that involve confronting these terrible fears that they have, or being in sort of situations that can just paralyze you with fear, but still being able to move forward and have agency in their story and in their life. I think it's just something that kind of has always resonated with me. And then certainly as a young reader, I loved horror novels. And part of what I loved so much about it is that like horror stories, they almost have a physical connection to you. Like when you get scared, you know, the hair on the back of your neck will stand up, or you can break out in goosebumps. And this is happening to you. You're receiving this through text, through print, but it feels like some kind of electricity that the writer is sending through like the magic portal to really touch you, you know. And I think that you know was always something that I was looking for, was those feelings, you know, starting with like Stephen King and moving into like Octavia Butler and all the different writers, but I was always looking for that thrill ride. And as an older person now, I'm fascinated by how I can create that ride for readers. Like, how can I get them to feel along with me? And I think it's just a lifelong fascination with the power of fear in fiction.
Thank you, Adam. Actually, we're going to do Katie next.
I was never a fan of anything scary. I'm still really not. I still can't watch most horror movies. Can't really read most horror novels.
Do you know that's very common that I hear from writers, like
Yeah.
that write all these, I mean, because your book is terrifying.
Yeah.
So
Well,
how do you do that?
It's different when you're writing it, you know, you're sort of in control. I think for me, what I like about writing horror is the way you can sort of boil down someone's emotional state to tie in with their physical state. So in other words, like a character in a book who's profoundly lonely, that can be reflected through some sort of horrifying situation that she's in, and it's amplified and they play off of each other. And I find it's very satisfying as a writer to have not just the dimension of the character, but also to be able to really reflect what they're going through in the sort of horrifying scenario that they're in. In other words, you know, like I mentioned that I had a terrible time in middle school. You feel, as a kid, you feel almost haunted by like the pressures and the especially the people who are mean to you, and you're thinking, why is this happening to me? Why are people treating me this way? And so when you add in an evil ghost, then it's like, oh yeah, really, why is this happening to me? And so then I don't know, I just have always loved the way that the two levels tie together, like the supernatural and the natural. And the supernatural can bring out the strength in the character to sort of deal with their natural problems as well. You know, which most of us don't get, probably, thankfully. We don't have to deal with evil ghosts to help us through our middle school crises, but yeah, my characters get that little, it's actually like a little boost to them. You know, once you solve this problem, then, you know, what are your other problems amount to? Not so much.
Definitely, that is definitely true. Adam, what about you? Why horror, and why are you so morbid to be your teacher?
I've always been attracted to horror, even before I could read. My father constantly took me to the movies, and he constantly took me to the comic book store. Even like days, he was like, it's first grade, you could skip. Like we would go see movies, and we would go to the comic book store. And before I could read, I would sit in his lap and he would read me the comics I would pick out, and I would just naturally gravitate towards the darker stuff. And same with movies and film. And I was very scared. It's not that I wasn't afraid. It's like I concretely remember going to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is a Nightmare on Elm Street film. I concretely remember running from the theater at certain points, and I was very young. And then a few years later, Scream came out, and another Wes Craven picture, which I didn't make it through. Like, you know, the most horrifying scene in the movie is Drew Barrymore's death. But I like ran screaming from the theater once her parents get home and find her body. And then very shortly thereafter, I was able to kind of catch it on VHS and get all the way through and handle it. And this isn't like, don't call DHS. I'm grown now. It's, you don't have to you don't have to worry about me. This is maybe questionable parenting technique. I loved it, but it instilled in me a love of horror. The first things he'd ever read me were Stephen King stories. He had a huge Stephen King collection of hardcovers. So just constantly kind of around it, and constantly like those were the things on shelves. He's not particularly a horror fan. That's what's so funny about it, is my dad's not a horror guy. But that's out of the things that he exposed me to. That's kind of the things that I picked up on. And I think, and as I've done like over a decade of like going to conventions and talking on panels and talking to people about horror, especially people who are not horror fans, I find that most non-horror fans, most like kind of people who don't live and breathe this stuff, or it's not their job, it's not their avocation or their vocation. They have a lot of people have a somewhat narrow view of what horror is, and it's different depending on each person. Like if you talk to someone, they'll either think a slasher is a horror, they'll think a ghost story is a horror, they'll think a giant monster movie, like they'll think certain things. You say horror, and a certain thing will pop up in their head, and I think that's telling and interesting to what a diverse and wide genre it is. I'm a big fan of movie musicals, which is very different than this. But I was thinking about that yesterday, how musicals are not so much a genre as they are a mode. Like you can have a sad musical, you can have a happy musical, you can have a musical about anything. There's a musical about presidential assassins. Like there's a musical about everything. And I think the same is true for horror. Horror is so broad, and such a broad, it has that tactile feel that Kelly was talking about, and it has that physicality to it, a lot of it, but some of it's purely psychological. And I think there's something, the genre is broad enough, or at least my definition of the genre is so broad that it feels almost less like a genre and more like a mode, like an entire media onto itself. And that's why I love horror, because I never get bored writing horror. People are like, why will, another horror book? It's like, yeah, because I have so many different kinds of horror I haven't even touched on yet that I would love to work on and develop. And I've been a fan of this stuff since I was, pre remembering, like I've been a fan of this stuff. So yeah, that's why I just love it. So
I love how all three of you sort of said in different ways, the world is really scary and bad things happen, and this is how we process it. But there's so many options. I want to ask you then, so then we talked about why horror, but why teen audience? I mean, I was a teen librarian and an adult librarian, and I understand why that audience is so great. But I don't know if the teens always understand how much you want to tell them these stories. And you are authors that definitely get it. I mean, that's why we picked your books. But, right now, talking to the teens, why do you want to help them and tell their stories? Katie?
I have been asked many times, when am I going to write a real book, which I think is hilarious. Yeah, thumbs down to that. Because there's this weird thing where people don't think of children as people. You think of children as like a little pod person who's just waiting to wake up one day and be a human being. I don't know why I have never felt that way. I don't know if it's because after my terrible middle school experience, I had an amazing high school experience where I met and cherished so many people for so many great reasons. When you're involved in the arts, I think especially as a teen, you get an appreciation for people on multiple levels. And so I look back at the people I went to school with even now, and I can't believe the stuff that they were able to do, the amount of respect I have for the effort that everyone was putting in, and just for who they were. As far as writing for teens, I think it's different. And I think a lot of people have a sense that it's different and they don't know why. To me, it's because it's formative. Whatever happens in the book is forming your worldview. As opposed to if you're writing for adults, you might write a ghost story for adults and it changes something for them, but it doesn't form them. It doesn't sort of make the people who they are. And I am fascinated by the point in our lives where we become formed, where we become one thing instead of another thing. And to me, the stakes in that are really high and amazing. And I'm fascinated by that. Just in the young people I know, when you watch someone make a choice to be this type of person or that type of person, or to feel strong about something, or to feel weak or scared about something. As a mom, I see my kids learning every day. It's the most fascinating thing in the world to watch someone become a person. And that's right where YA hits. It hits you at that point where you're starting to see this happening in yourself. And I love it. I mean, I think about writing for adults. Every adult idea I've ever had that I thought was any good got better when I made it a teenage book. The Companion started as a book about an adult, and it was like, it felt hollow to me. I don't see what there is in it. And that says something about me, I'm sure, as a writer and my limitations, but I feel like, I don't know, all I've ever wanted to write was for teens. So
I love when you talked about, the stakes are so high.
yeah.
That makes sense why The Companion works way better as a YA novel. Because let me tell you, people out there, when you read it, the stakes are very high, and that young woman rises to the challenge. Adam, what about you? Why teens? Because you have written for adults and movies and other properties and such.
I think the interesting thing is I think I was fairly ignorant about kind of what YA fiction even was when I began writing, and I think you'll see a lot of adult horror readers say the same thing, and I think it's such a flawed logic, and it's a flawed logic that I had of like, oh well, when I was a kid, I was reading Anne Rice, or I was reading Clive Barker, or I was reading like there's a lot of that when you tell adult horror readers that you write YA. You kind of get a little bit of that back. And that's kind of where I was at. I'd written a few novels, and then while I was writing my first few novels, they were small press and medium press and micro press books. I was a teacher. I was a high school English teacher for 4 or 5 years. And I think that really changed the way I looked at teenagers. I wasn't that much older than the kids I was teaching, but I think it, like, their perspectives and what they're going through and what their interests were really changed the way I saw writing for a teen audience. And then I kind of, once I was gonna write Clown of the Cornfield, I talked to people that had done MFAs in YA, and I was just basically like doing a whole survey. I was reading a ton of YA novels. I was like, what are the best YA horror novels? I got to read them all. I got to get caught up very quickly on a genre. I don't want to be a carpetbagger. I don't want to be the person that comes in and is like, I'm the adult horror author, not even like any big shakes, but I'll like, I wanted to learn, and I wanted to know what the genre was and what its power was. And I was so blown away by it, and I was so heartened by the fact that I think I had kind of been writing YA all along. Like, my first book is about teenagers. I think a lot of the horror that I'm interested in, and the horror that I kind of was very formative for me, is about teenagers anyway. And I think that coming of age stories, I'm always very interested in them. So I think, like, the idea that you could just reskin and republish some of my earlier work as YA and no one would bat an eye speaks to the fact that I was kind of already in that mode anyway. And then with Clown of the Cornfield, it just makes sense. It's a teen slasher. It is naturally about the concerns of teenagers, and the idea of big feelings, and the idea of formative feelings, and the idea of when you're in high school. I'm sure to varying degrees we all didn't have the greatest high school experiences, but I remember feeling like almost apocalyptic. I remember feeling like life and death over like, in retrospect, the smallest things, and the things that I wish I could go back and just be like, yo, Adam, that's like not a big deal. Just doesn't matter. And I think transmuting those into a psychopath in a clown costume, like coming to cut you up, is like, they're on the same emotional wavelength, even though one is actually life and death, and one is your hormones and your neural pathways that are still forming, telling you that something is life and death. They're almost indistinguishable. So I think I like that. I like playing with that. And I had such newfound respect for the teen mind and the teen concerns and teen issues, and what teenagers think about and are concerned with after teaching. I think that was just like, and now I feel like I really won't go back. My next book that's unannounced, that's not a clown book, is teen. Like they're all like, I haven't had an idea, and I haven't thought of writing an adult book since Clown in the Cornfield was released. It's interesting the way that Katie said that, where like now I'm so ride or die. I can't think of why I wouldn't, because it's such a lush ground for telling all kinds of horror stories, even if they are teen horror stories.
And what's so important, and we're going to get to Kelly next, because I know she does this as well, is each of you clearly understands teens, and doesn't make their concerns small, which some adults may think they are. Also, Adam, what I love about your book is it's also about the generational divide too. And the big one between these children who are very tech savvy and the grownups who don't get them, which I also really, really enjoyed. And Kelly, you even talked about this with your book that came out now, that's coming out now this year, about the going into the South and all that. You can show it up. Yes. But you obviously deal with very big concerns as well. I mean, the whole cult that's an end of the world cult, which clearly is unreliable, but yet the end of the world is there when she goes out. What draws you to writing about these very serious issues to a teen audience?
Yeah, so for me, the major difference between, and like there's not as many differences, I think, as sometimes we think, but the major difference between like a YA book and just an adult book is that the YA is much more likely to be very concerned with identity. Like I would say even that identity formation, like, Katie was talking about the formative things, like that's the crucial thing that's going on in your YA coming of age story. And that's just the thing that I happen to be the most interested in writing. And it's something that teenagers are naturally going to be interested in reading because they're in the process of making these kind of decisions that you might have dramatized in your story. Particularly with this new book, Mirror Girls, is it echoes Agnes in certain ways, but it has a more direct sort of through line to my own teenage years. I was, I'm a biracial person. I was raised in the Black community, but I present as white. And I think that sort of schism between how I appear to other people and who I feel that I am was like a major hiccup for me. And it's something that I'm always trying to like untangle in these stories about these different girls. It's sort of like, what do you do when like the person you see in the mirror, you truly don't think reflects you? Like how does that destabilize your world? And then how do you cobble together like pieces of what matter to you to be the person you really need to be? And like for Agnes, that's, say no to cults, and, that, prioritizing her brother over the things she's been told to prioritize, but also still maintaining her own sense of spirituality. She escapes from this cult, but she in no way kind of just like disavows religion and like any spiritual sense. She really has to discover, from the things that I've learned, what am I going to keep as I become this person and what am I going to leave behind?
And how am I going to live?
And how am I going to survive? Right, exactly. And I would say that that's like an echo of these concerns. I mean, it really is life or death stakes. If you cannot understand your own identity, if you can't sort of raise it before you as like kind of a shield, you're not going to survive in like this sort of soul crushed way. And so I think that that is the stakes that we're kind of talking about, where it's, it's formative, it's crucial, it's life or death. And then of course we can dramatize it with like, my twin sisters in Mirror Girls, there's a mirror curse that echoes for me some of the situations that I went through. Like I really had trouble looking in the mirror at a certain point because I was like very confused about my racial identity. And Agnes in the cult, does the cult reflect her? Or, and then when she gets into this end of the world, does that reflect her sin, of leaving this cult? And so making those decisions about what constitutes yourself, what constitutes your worldview, I just think it's so much fun. And I kind of just like was one of those people too who never grew out of reading YA. So it was very natural that I would end up writing it.
Thank you. And I do like how you all write for similar reasons, which I know the teens are going to appreciate, but yet we get all these wonderful different stories. Speaking of different stories, I would love for you to talk now a little bit about what you like reading for yourself and also, or watching, or whatever kind of stories you like to consume. And then can you suggest some of your favorite authors for the teens out there, whether they're horror or not? We'll go with Adam first.
Okay. I wrote down a little list because I knew this question was coming, and I've never. I do like a lot of like I do a YouTube and I do TikTok where like the bulk of my things that I do is like suggesting books. But every time I get on a panel, I'm like or someone goes before and I'm like, she took my answer. So I'm sorry I get to go first. I'll leave some for everyone. But
I actually picked you first because I thought you'd be the most prepared, but now you're saying it leaves your
Well,
mind.
look, I got it. I first and foremost, these are all adult authors for the most part, or no, that's not true. Some of these are adult authors and some of them are YA, but I think they are kind of crossover. None of them have written something that if I handed it to a 15-year-old, I'd be like, oh no, what did I do? So Stephen Graham Jones, first and foremost, every panel I'm on, Dr. Jones is the best. I think he's the best living writer. I really do think that. And he's also written YA. Like if you want YA, Mongrels is a great book. If you want something more adult, some of his newer ones, which are also about My Heart is a Chainsaw, features a teen protagonist. So it's Rachel Harrison. I love The Return. That's like one of my favorite books in years. And then she's got a new one coming out. It's about werewolves, and her last one was
About witches,
which is kind of a very light, almost like horror-esque kind of comedy about relationship and self-worth issues.
And her characters are all just barely adults too.
Yeah.
So that is nice.
Yeah. In The Return, they're in their 20s, but I remember we'd done like an interview together, and I think she was supposed to be interviewing me, but I had just read The Return, so it became like I just want to talk to you about The Return. But we found out we had all these incredible similarities. Like we had gone to school at the same time in the same city. Like we're from similar places. And it was like I was like, wow, I don't have much insight into what it's like to be a 20-something young woman, but I feel like I really connect with this story, and that was why. But Madeline Rue, her YA is fantastic. The Asylum series I really like. And this is all present company accepted. Please buy and read the books on this panel.
Yes, I should have said you're not allowed to suggest each other because you're all on the screen.
Terrific. I was very, very surprised by Katie's answer about not being a horror person, because the companion is so steeped in the Gothic and feels so like emblematic of that genre. I was like, how do you produce something like that? And you're not like a complete like encyclopedic person about that. And Mirror Girls is that's coming out soon.
It's out since February.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna get that. I got the other one. I'm gonna get
all of the books, including the new ones, are in the Summer Scares programming guide on the back page. Anyway, Adam, continue.
I'm gonna go down the list. Just one more. Victor LaValle. I love his writing, and another author who almost slipstream. His books are all different, and I would consider them all dark, but I wouldn't consider them all horror. And you can kind of pick any one of his, The Companion or Ballad of Black Tom, and they're fantastic.
So the Changeling, you said The Companion.
Yeah,
that's okay because
the Companion.
I'm in your head.
I know. Now it's really spooky. So Stephen Graham Jones Mongrels was a former Summer Scares title, and he was a former spokesperson. And The Ballad of Black Tom is a great crossover and was also a Summer Scares selection. So in past years. Kelly, what about you? What do you like to read in your free time? And what authors do you want to suggest?
So it's interesting. I feel like I also have a lot of adult authors to recommend that sort of are like hitting that horror third rail for me that I think is perfect crossover work as well. Stephen King was kind of my entrance into reading horror, as it was for a lot of us. And, in terms of movies like John Carpenter's The Thing was, I think, the one that made the biggest impact. But I remember asking my mother, I was like, how come there's no Black horror? And she was like, shut your mouth, at the time. And she gave me a book by Octavia Butler. And I was like, blown away. And that was like this life-changing thing, was to read The Parable of the Sower, which is a story about a young woman who goes into the apocalypse. It was probably the sort of most originary inspiration for Agnes at the end of the world, because she's also on that kind of journey into the apocalypse to see what can be made from the remains of the world. And after that, it was like I went down the slide of like Tanana Reeve Do, and today I can also recommend N.K. Jemisin, who does amazing work that I really think is great for teen readers, especially if you like any of that kind of cosmic horror where it's like those outer stakes have this metaphorical resonance with what's going on for the characters. And I can also recommend that she does write for teens, Kaelin Baron. She started with a retelling called Cinderella is Dead that sort of combined like a voodoo sensibility with the Cinderella myth that I thought came out really, really well. And she's also working right now on a Jekyll and Hyde retelling. Yeah, I'm really excited for this one, but she's just wonderful in general. I also think that Coulson Whitehead is a horror novelist, although we don't always talk about it in that way. And the one that I would recommend for teens is Nickel Boys. And it's scary. It's really, really scary. And in the way that some historical fiction, I think, becomes horror when you're talking about certain time periods. But it's like, it's just gorgeous and it covers so much. And I just think that it's a really great choice if you're looking for something like that.
It definitely deals with death and what comes around, and there is a good twist that's very horror-esque. So
yes, and also, this idea of like what's buried under the ground that we're walking on now. Like I think for sort of minority writers of horror, that's a big major theme is like I was just doing sort of a plantation tour for my next book. What are the things that we don't know are even buried beneath our feet? Like, what are the things that help build this country that are have some of these dark resonances and that should really be frightening us and that we should also really be looking at? So I love that he's doing that too, that there's like this excavation work.
Thank you, Kelly. Katie, your turn.
I am, I want to say woefully underprepared, but the truth is that I read widely and not deeply usually in people's works. I guess what I've been doing for the past couple of years is I'll read one book by an author and then I'll look for something that's really different to read. And so I've sort of stumbled my way. So I don't have a lot of authors to say like definitely go and read everything this person has ever written, although I will say that Gretchen McNeil, who's in YA horror, she has a new book that's due out any minute now, called Dig Two Graves. I have to confess she's like a really close dear friend of mine, but that's because of horror and because of also like the horror of our lives that we were going through when we met. We could relate to each other. And I have to say, she's like the hardest working author that I've ever met in my life. She can write a book while I'm sitting around whining for like 2 months. She'll be like, oh, I just turned in that draft. And I'm like, shut up, go away. I hate you. But her stuff is so fun. And it's very, it's just really fun and active and really like you can dig into her backlist and everything's a little different from each other. And she's so playful. So she's who I would recommend for young people looking for horror right now. In general, I mean, I am a huge fan of Agatha Christie. And then maybe this is where my Gothic stuff comes from. Like I love the Trollope. I'm a huge fan of Trollope. His characters, I mean, his writing to me is way more modern than people would ever give him credit for being, especially the way he writes women. Like somehow 180 years ago, he was able to write women who were flawed and real and interesting and smart and dumb, so I always have loved his stuff. And then in general, I guess I would recommend that people look for a book that looks interesting. I'm aware, I'm a little in my own world because of my kids being sick for so long, not very sick, but I know that right now it seems like people will find an author and read 40 books by that author, which is great, but you're missing a lot when you're not out there just grabbing a book that has a cover that looks interesting to you, or an author who looks interesting, or an author who's like someone you haven't read before. And so I guess that would be my main recommendation is read widely, because you also never know, you're going to pick up a Western and it's going to change your life. And suddenly you're going to want to write Westerns or read more. So that would be my advice. I'm not I'm not a good person for making book
No,
recommendations.
that's
I'm
actually
sorry.
wonderful advice. I'm glad you by chance went last, because you each had so many different, ways to look at it. But that is a great point. The library is a great place for the teens to go and just find things. I frequently tell library staff when I train them, let's not forget, let's put those books face out and let especially the teens find the books with good covers. Your books all have good covers, but it's because that, especially with the teen market, the publishers know that they're in a competitive marketplace, not just because of the great YA we have now and this renaissance of wonderful, sophisticated stories for teens, which I wish were there when I was younger. And like Adam had to go read, like I read VC Andrews when I was 11. Like that's not, there are better choices for kids like me now. And I was able to give my kid better choices when she was growing up. But the idea that there's so many choices out there, and not just competing within the teen marketplace, but for the teens' attention. They are so busy, and, social media, which Adam gets into a little bit in his book, and there's so much else competing for their attention. The books need to draw kids in, and that advice, Katie, I think is fantastic. And just to remind everyone who's watching this, each of these books in the programming guide, not only do we have the summary of the book and why it would be appealing, but we have 4 read-alikes for every title. And some of them are adult and some of them are YA, and they are all good options if you liked the storytelling in any of them. So, we have 3 authors and 3 books for you here, but there are 4 more titles for each. So there are many, many books you can try, and they'll be at your library. So you don't have to worry about finding them yourself. Thank you, though, everyone, for being here. I'm going to give everyone one last chance to talk to the audience before we finish up, and I'll call on you. But anything else you want to say, but also let people know how they can connect with you, what's going on that maybe they want to know about, if you have any plans to be out and about this year, the rest of this year, and, if social media and all that. So Adam, why don't you go first?
I'm on Twitter too much. I'm on Instagram not enough. I'm on TikTok also too much, and I'm on YouTube, where if you thought these answers were long and I was rambling, you should see me talk about the Puppet Master movies for an hour and a half on YouTube. So if you're at all interested in that, I will do a little plug of like Clown in the Cornfield. If you enjoyed this at your local library, please ask your local library to order in Clown in the Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives, or just to go buy it yourself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. Katie, what about you?
I'm on Twitter a little bit at Katie Allender, which is my name, and I wouldn't count on receiving any great bits of information or insight there, but every once in a while my children will take me down and humble me with something hilarious, and I'll put that up there. But I guess I would just say my advice would be to just don't judge yourself by what other people are reading or doing or wearing or listening to. Just do what feels right to you, and pursue what feels right for you in terms of what you like to read or what you like to watch or listen to or wear, or who you want to be. I think there's insane pressure right now for people to try to fit into these crazy molds, and it's really sad. It's horrifying. So maybe we'll write a book about it. And I just want people to know that you don't have to be that way. You can just be who you are, and you're great.
Thank you, Katie. And Kelly, what about you?
Yes, so you can find me on Instagram and on TikTok. I once had a Twitter, but it got hacked, and then I never could get back to it, which is its own horror story. But Agnes at the End of the World, your best bet for finding it is probably the library. It's out in paperback too, if you wanted to buy the paperback. Mirror Girls was, you can find it at Target because it was like the March book club pick there. So Target's great because you can get that little discount and also get your shampoo. But libraries always should be your first stop. My other recommendation is ask your librarians about what books have been banned recently and see if you can get copies of those. I feel like that's a really fun like sort of adventure that you can go on as a teenager right now, because the list is so long and the books are so amazing. So, you know, while you're getting, you know, everybody here, you know, pick up some of those books too.
And that banning is horrifying in and of itself. So yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. I want to remind everyone watching that all you have to do is email libraries@horror.org. It's down in the show description. You can see that. And you can contact myself or Conrad Stump with that email, and we can put you in touch with these great authors who will come to your library and talk to your groups. Book groups especially, or teen writer groups, are a great option for these authors to be part of your summer reading plans. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you at the library.